You know how you pull on your ends and it's like straggly? Cut it off, sis. Cut it, cut it, cut it, cut it. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl, Jen J. Welcome back for another video. If you're new here, welcome, have a seat. Today we're going to be discussing a very important topic if you want healthy, long, 4C hair. Trimming your ends. I know we all hate to hear about it, but this is the honest truth. We're going to be discussing the importance of trimming your ends, the tools you need to trim your ends, how often you should be doing it, and how you should go about trimming your ends. So if this is something you're interested in, which you should be if you want long hair, then keep on watching. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get notified every single time I upload a new video. Also follow me on Instagram where I post all of these makeup looks, more pictures, all of these goodies that you're not going to see here on YouTube. Alright, so before we get into how to trim your ends, let's discuss why. Why do you need to trim your ends? It's so important, and I feel like you guys hear it all the time that you should be trimming your ends, but we are so attached to our hair as naturals. We want to grow our hair. So the thought of you cutting your hair is kind of overwhelming, but let's break it all down so that you understand the importance. And once you do, you will trim your ends because you can't have healthy hair without trimming your ends. So your ends are the oldest part of your hair. We all know that. As a result, they get matted, they get frayed, especially if you don't have a consistent hair care routine. One of the reasons why you absolutely need to trim your ends is because of split ends and single strand knots. We all hate them. I'm sure you've noticed them in your hair. And unfortunately, they are kind of unavoidable. They are going to happen over time, especially with wear and tear on your hair. So you can't entirely prevent them, but with proper hair care, you can reduce the amount of split ends that you get, the amount of knots that you get. But once you get them, they need to go. I don't believe in these products that say they are going to mend your split ends. I mean, you can try them for yourself, but I would recommend you to save your coins, invest in a great pair of scissors, and cut your ends when it's needed. So what are split ends? Split ends are splitting or fraying of your ends due to weathering and damage. And you're probably like, damage from what? My hair isn't damaged. Well, yes, sis, it is. There's a lot of wear and tear on our ends when we are washing our hair, combing our hair, brushing our hair, coloring our hair, flat ironing our hair, curling our hair. So from us handling our hair on a day-to-day basis, there are some damage that can potentially happen, and that's how you get split ends and knots. Especially with single strand knots, these are basically one strand of your hair curling on itself to the point that it formed this perfect knot. You can't entirely prevent them, and I know I get a lot of messages from people telling me, well, how can I prevent them? I really hate them. Trust me, sis, we all hate them. And it's just a characteristic of curly hair. The curlier your hair is, the more likely it is to happen. However, with moisturizing and proper care, you can try to reduce the amount of knots and splitting that you can get. All right, so let's discuss the different type of split ends and what they say about you. Yes, split ends are spilling the tea on who you are as a caregiver. So the first one is the basic split. This type of split ends are the most common. That's basically when, the ends of your hair split in two. The cortex is still held together. It's just that the very ends of your hair is starting to split or separate. The basic split is an indication that your hair needs a bit more nourishment, so you should be moisturizing a little bit more. Like I said, split ends are not entirely preventable. You are going to get wear and tear in your hair, but just up in the moisture. There's the mini split, which is the very early sign of split ends. It's not too late for your hair at that point. You can still try to really get down with moisturizing your hair and be more consistent with your routine, and also cut back on the detangling, because I feel like we're kind of obsessed with detangling and brushing our hair, and these tools actually cause a lot more damage than good sometimes. So when the hair is just starting to split, it's not so bad, it's okay, not all is lost. So the third type of split ends is a fork in the road. They're less common than the basic split and the mini split. It's an indication of a bit more damage and splitting within your hair. It's also letting you know that you need to be doing more deep conditioning treatments to really nourish your hair and really get that moisture within your strands. The fourth type is the tree. So again, there is a lot more damage happening. As you can tell from, the very first basic split or the mini split down to here, we have a lot more damage. So more damage is actually happening on one side of your strand than the other. So it's continuing to split down the shaft of your hair. And this is an indication that you need to trim your ends ASAP. There is no going around it. Once you have split ends and damage, you need to cut them off. There is no fixing it. Cut it, cut it, cut it, cut it. The fifth type is the candle. That's when there's been a lot of damage on the cuticle layer. So basically the cuticle layer is not even there anymore. You just have the cortex layer sticking out. You're lucky that the cortex layer hasn't even started to split yet, but you should be getting a trim. Again, there is no going around it. At that point, you can tell that your ends are really frayed. You know how your ends start thick at the bottom and then it just starts getting thinner and thinner towards the end? Well, those are indication that you have split ends. Depending on how your hair is split, one side can break off, so leaving half of your strand, or you can have the candles where the cuticle layers has fallen off, so then it's a lot thinner towards your end. So although there is basically infinite amount of ways that your hair can split, from my research I found that these are the most common ways. And the last one is the knot, like I mentioned earlier. Those are characteristic of curly hair. Basically your hair curling and coiling around itself to the point that it creates a perfect knot. They also need to be cut out.
Yeah, you need to cut it.
All right, so let's move on to the tools that you need to cut your hair. You do not want to use your fingers. Let's start with that, because I know we are so obsessed with picking at our hair, looking for split ends, finding little knots, and ripping them out. Do not do that. You are causing more damage than necessary. Once you rip your hair out, then you just literally created more split ends. That's just going to continue to split up the shaft of your hair. So invest in some proper hair cutting shears. And I say that because it has to only be used for your hair. Don't use this pair of scissors that's been in the kitchen since 1999. That is not for your hair. So get yourself some proper shears. I have two here. Let's talk about the first one here. So this I had for years, which is why I invested in another one. I remember getting it from Walmart. It's by the brand Goody. They were really nice. I believe $11 or $12 at the time, and they were quite sharp for the purpose that I needed them for. So that was kind of an upgrade at the time. And then from there, I moved on to these pair of shears. So these are top of the line hair cutting shears. Apparently they're made with like Japanese steel. They are extremely sharp. You can cut yourself with these, and I have cut myself with them. So you want to be really careful when you get super sharp shears for your hair. I believe those were $60. I know, I kind of like snapped and went all professional, but I have never used something so sharp for my hair, and I can feel the difference. They're from Cosmoprof, and I believe you need a membership to be able to buy things there. But I know somebody that knows somebody. So those are the tools that I would recommend. So hair cutting shears, and you can get that anywhere. You want to invest in something that is extremely sharp. It doesn't have to be $60. You can go to Sally's. They have some options behind the counter, or you can even go to Walmart. Do what works for you, but just make sure that whatever you use, it's only for your hair. You're not using it to also cut your children's school project. No, this is just for your hair. Keep it somewhere hidden, because that is your hair trimming scissors. Do not cut anything else with it, because it's just going to dull your scissors, and then you are going to be cutting your hair with something that's dull, and that's a big no-no. The reason why you don't want to use dull scissors for your hair is because it's actually going to cut your hair in a jagged way. So that's going to cause more split ends as soon as you cut your hair. So that's actually not going to help your cause at all. All right, so let's talk about how you know that you need a trim, because a lot of people are like, well, how do I know? How can I tell? And one of the given tell that you need a trim is that your ends are matted all the time. you can't detangle your hair easily, you have a lot of knots, you have a lot of split ends. So these are the telltale signs that you need a trim. If your ends are matted all of the time, no matter what you do, you just detangled your hair, they are matted. If they're breaking, so you're getting a lot of breakage and you're not sure why, you can tell when you pull on your hair, it's frayed, so it started out thick, and then when you get to the end, honestly, there's barely any hair there, and you have a lot of split ends, so your ends feels really rough. That's how you can tell you have split ends, because your hair is splitting into different branches, or hopefully just split once. So now your ends are extremely bushy. It just feels really dry. When you run your fingers from your roots to your ends, you can tell the difference when you get to your ends. That's an indication that you need to trim. And also when you have a lot of knots. So once I start noticing a lot of knots, then I know it's time for me to start thinking about trimming my hair. And I'm not saying that for you to be obsessed with your ends, for you to always be looking for knots. Because I mean, if you start looking for knots, you are going to find knots, boo-boo. But as you take care of your hair and you're noticing an increasing amount of knots, an increasing amount of split ends, then you should start thinking about trimming your ends. And also thinking about when was the last time you trimmed your ends. All right, so let's get into how. You have your sharp scissors and you're ready to go. That's basically all that you need. So there's two different methods on how you can trim your ends. There's one that I recommend, the other one I don't care too much for, but I will still show you just in case you want to make a choice. Personally, I like to trim my ends when my hair is wet or damp. I don't do it on dry hair, and that's because I have a whole little routine as to how I trim my ends. So I trim my ends today and I'm left with these juicy twists, this moisturized twist, and that's how I like to do it because it leaves me with a protective style after cutting my hair. So let's get into the footage on how to trim your ends. All right, so let's get into the juicy part of this video, which is exactly how I trim my ends. So I'm starting on freshly co-washed hair, and I only co-wash for the purpose of me trimming my hair. You can see that my hair needs a trim. As you can tell, they're already getting all matted up, and you can see how my ends are stringy. They have to go, especially in the front, although my hair seems healthy at first, but when you pull on it, the ends are very stringy. All of that honestly could go. So the way I go about doing it, like I said, I start when my hair is damp. I make sure that my hair is thoroughly detangled. At times, I would even use a small tooth comb. That is the only time I would recommend using something like that. But I like to make sure that my ends are thoroughly detangled, and I put my hair into a twist. A few options as to where you can cut your hair. The first area will represent where I would technically recommend if you are just trimming your ends. But I haven't trimmed my ends since October, and they're in pretty bad shape. So I'm going to go a little bit higher. I'm not attached to dead split ends or knots, so they can go. I'm okay to have shorter hair or give myself a haircut at this point. Once you put your hair into a twist and you run your fingers up and down the twist, you would definitely be able to tell where your split ends are. You'll be able to tell that your hair is a lot rougher at the end, especially when your hair is moisturized. So once I cut a twist, I move on to the next. I moisturize, thoroughly detangle. So this is a perfect example of just split ends or straggly ends. You can tell that, first of all, there's little hairs that are just dangling there, and as you look from my roots to my tips, you can see how much thinner my ends has gotten. So where I'm pinching with my fingers right now is where my hair drastically gets thinner. However, you don't have to cut that much hair. That's a lot of hair to cut. But when you pull on it, you'll also be able to see the state of your hair, especially your ends, and that will give you a good idea of where you should cut. So personally, I will cut right there, and before I cut, I'll make sure that things are a little bit even. They don't have to be perfect. I don't really wear my hair straight ever, so I'm not concerned with making my hair even. So this is the second method where you pull your hair thought in between your fingers and cut. I don't particularly love this method because, as you can tell, it's not a lot of hair that's left on the other side of my fingers. But with shrinkage, you go ahead and pull on it, it's a lot more hair than you think. So I feel like this method gives me a lot less control on how much hair I'm really cutting. It's a good way to be able to analyze your hair before you cut it, however, but I prefer the first method. When you get a fresh trim, your ends are like butter. You can run your fingers through them. You can comb your hair. There's no matting, no tangles. It's like a breath of fresh air. Once you're done trimming, I would recommend you put your hair into a twist and look at these ends. They're bouncing right back. It's beautiful. If you're having a lot of tangles, breakage, and matting at your ends, I would highly recommend getting yourself a trim. And if you're just starting on your journey and you really don't know, just start by getting yourself a nice little trim and move on from there, because once your end starts getting tangled and matted, you'll definitely be able to tell the difference. And it'll be a lot easier for you to style your hair. So there's many benefits to you getting a trim. So I like to trim my hair this way because I'm left with my hair in medium-sized twist, which is kind of like a protective style, and I just completely give myself a little break so my hair is moisturized, is twisted, and I leave it that way. So trimming schedule. How often should you trim your ends? The rule of thumb is to trim your ends every 3 to 4 months. So a lot of people feel that this is too often or too much. How are you going to retain length if you're constantly cutting your ends? Now you can stretch it further if you'd like, depending on your hair care habits and how you care for your hair. Obviously you can do what you want, or you can just not trim your ends at all. I mean, no one's checking for you, boo. People typically say 3 to 4 months, and I agree with that at first. If you don't know how often you should do it, that's a good rule of thumb. However, what I've realized is that trimming your ends, that schedule is kind of personal. It depends on so many different factors, such as how often you moisturize, how often you deep condition, how do you care for your hair? Do you use a lot of tools? Do you straighten your hair? Do you use heat? So the best way for you to figure out how often you should trim your ends is to pay attention to your hair. So let's say today you watch this video and you decide to trim your ends. Great. Now you're going to pay attention to them, you're going to feel around, you will feel for your split ends, you will understand what's going on with your ends. Hopefully from the clips earlier, you'll be able to tell exactly where to cut, so then you can trim your ends. Cool. Mark down that date. And then go on about your day, go on about your hair care routine, do your thing. So let's say 2-3 months down the road, you start noticing that your ends are rough again. You start noticing split ends, you notice single strand knots, and you start feeling uncomfortable with the amount of matting and breakage that's happening. So now you're going to trim your ends again. Once you do that and you refer back to today, then you'll see how long it took for your ends to start feeling bushy and split and have knots again. So then that becomes your trimming schedule. And you could mark it down over, let's say, the course of the next 2-3 trims, and you'll see a pattern, and that will let you know how often you should be trimming your ends, and that will be highly personalized based on your hair care habits. You get what I'm saying? I think it's the best way for you to trim your ends for you versus just following somebody else's routine. It's been a while since I actually cut my ends, so today when I cut, I did cut a fair amount. I'm okay with that. I'd rather have healthier hair than hold on to these straggly ends. Listen, letting go of these ends, you are doing yourself a favor, because your hair is going to grow and feel much more fuller, stronger, and healthier. If you are growing your hair and you want to hold on to these straggly ass ends, your hair is not going to look good. It's going to be matted all the time, and it's actually going to be more frustrated for you to care for your hair. So I will highly recommend you to just let go of the dead ends and start fresh. You don't have to cut a lot of your hair out. You just have to make sure you're paying attention and cutting off, you know, what you feel is best, obviously, but you don't want to leave split ends in your hair because, well, that's not a good thing. All right, well, that's all I have for you. I hope you got something out of this video, especially around the importance of trimming your ends, what you should be using to trim your ends, how often you should do it, and how to go about it. If this video was helpful, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you have any more questions, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye. Give me a thumbs up because we need to normalize hairstyles like this, okay? We need to normalize 4C twist. Look how cute I look. I'm just saying you're missing out. There's so many hairstyles that you are missing out on.